Against the advice of my parents, I started working in a bikini coffee stand when I was 17 years old, and continued working there until I was 20. If some of you are unfamiliar with these, they're little drive-through espresso stands, usually painted in some neon color, where all the employees wear lingerie or bikinis while they serve coffee. I know this sounds strange, and believe me, it is strange. However, the money was very good. It was fun at the time, and my parents couldn't really afford to pay for college. There's no loudspeaker where customers place their order. They simply drive up to the stand, order coffee, and make small talk as they ogle you in your skimpy ensemble. Anyway, it's kind of hard to explain, so maybe just Google it. The Seattle area has them all over the place. Within a matter of months, the boss gave me the busiest shift. The shift began at 4 a.m. and ended at 9:30 a.m. Though the coffee stand wasn't officially open until about 4:30, I had to count the till, grind the espresso beans, fill up the sinks, take stock, clean if needed, and everything. The coffee stand was situated in the corner of a large parking lot, sharing the enormous empty lot with only one other retailer. The other retailer didn't even open until 10 a.m., so when I arrived, the lot was completely dark save for one dim street lamp above the stand and another in the far corner of the lot. I pulled up to the stand as I normally did, only this time it was my first shift alone. Normally I worked with one other girl, as the shift would get far too busy for just one person. I had a routine with regular customers, as I literally worked every single day. The boss didn't believe in time off unless requested. While I worked, I could see cars approach the stand, and know immediately what drink to prepare based on recognizing a customer's vehicle. After almost a year on the morning shift, it was rare to see a new vehicle or meet a new customer. My boss was extremely strict about being fast and efficient, and would have us prepare drinks in advance for our regulars while they waited in the line of cars. My boss was so strict that for the first 6 months of my working there, he would watch constantly on his camera system and call me on the business phone to scream at me for lack of efficiency. After this, I became so fast at preparing drinks, I guess he decided he would save money by having me work alone in the very early morning hours. So, like normal, I approached the stand and punched in the access code. I went inside and turned on some music right away to keep myself company. The street lamp directly above the coffee stand had burnt out a few days before, so it was rather dark outside. Coupled with the tinted sliding windows of the coffee stand, and the knowledge that I was completely alone, I felt a little creeped out, though not nearly as creeped out and terrified as I was about to feel in a few minutes. Even though the stand was technically open at 4:30, I wouldn't expect my first customer until about 4:45. I usually arrived at 4 a.m., but since it was my first shift alone, I came in at 3:30 to give myself enough time to complete all the opening tasks. My first customer was always Dave. He drove a red sports car and ordered a double cappuccino heavy on the foam. He worked for the local Boeing plant and would brag about his high-ranking job in between awkward remarks about my body. You get used to this sort of thing after a while, but nothing could prepare me for the sort of thing that happened to me on this particular dark morning. Though many of our customers were pervy men like Dave, most of our early morning customers weren't as lecherous as one would expect. They simply needed coffee, and no other business was open as early as ours. In fact, many of my early morning customers were married women in soccer mom vans in desperate need of caffeine. I glanced up at the clock as I counted the money in the till. 3:50 a.m. I finished the count and walked from the back of the stand onto the main floor. There were 2 steps separating the back of the stand from the main floor. The back of the stand had no windows and contained a bathroom, large refrigerator, washer, dryer, etc. This is the area where my coworkers and myself would get ready and joke around when customers couldn't see us. As soon as we walked onto the main floor where customers could see us, though, uniform was required, as well as heels. I counted up all of the syrup bottles. I opened the fridge and took stock inside. I turned on the espresso grinder and robotically poured in a bag of espresso beans. I started filling up the large commercial sink with soapy water. Music played softly on the stereo, but then I heard it. Over the faucet, the coffee grinder, and the music. I wasn't sure I heard anything at first, so I just ignored it. Then I heard it again. Someone was tapping on the sliding glass window of the stand. I wiped off my wet hands and grabbed my cell phone. 4:15 a.m. We weren't open for another 15 minutes. I checked the light switches to make sure I didn't accidentally flip on the open sign. Along with an open sign, the stand was equipped with bright floodlights to illuminate the presence of the stand. Due to the sheer darkness that morning, I had contemplated turning on the floodlights when I first arrived, but it was strictly forbidden to do so until the stand was open. Without the floodlights on and through the tinted glass, I couldn't see who was on the other side. I stood there staring at the window. Maybe it's just Dave, I rationalized to myself. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. The tapping had definitely grown louder. I picked up the business phone and punched in my boss's number. He had an extensive camera system, complete with night vision, and could see in real time both inside and outside of the stand. In the very least, he could tell me who was outside. The phone rang, and I got no answer. I flipped on the floodlights. I walked over to the window and saw the man now illuminated in the lights. His head was pressed up against the glass, hands cupped around his eyes as he tried to see in. I jumped back. "Hi," he yelled through the glass. "Can I get some coffee?" We aren't open for another 15 minutes, I replied. "My boss will be mad if I open early." "Oh, well, I can wait." The man then walked back away from the window and stepped into a small black Honda. I continued my opening duties, wearily eyeing the car. At the time, I felt a false sense of security, lulled into the daily routine of my shift. However, this was different. At 4:30, I dutifully turned on the open sign and watched as the man in the black Honda drove up to the window. He was wearing a dark red baseball cap, a thermal shirt, and plaid pajama pants. "Hi, sorry about that. What can I get for you this morning?" I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. The man looked at me for what felt like an eternity. "What I want doesn't appear to be on the menu," he said, not looking up from my crotch. "Okay, so I know what you're thinking. What did I expect working in this profession, gentlemen?" I brushed his comment aside with a laugh. "We have a great white chocolate mocha." I looked around frantically. Where the fuck was the usual morning guy, Dave? I silently prayed another customer would pull up behind this guy. He looked away and stared at his steering wheel. "I want you to be my maid." "Excuse me?" I said, not sure if I heard him correctly. "I want you to be my maid. I want you to come over to my house wearing a maid costume with nothing underneath. I want to watch you, and if you don't clean correctly, I'm going to do whatever I want to you." He paused and gripped his steering wheel tightly. "I'm not a nice guy." He looked up at me and smiled. Until that point in my life, I had never seen a truly sinister smile before. I slammed the long serving window shut. I ran to the back of the stand, hyperventilating at this point. I picked up the phone and called my boss repeatedly. No answer. I stood on the steps and peered out the window. The black Honda was gone, replaced by the familiar red of Dave's sports car. I never thought I would be happy to see pervy Dave, but here I was rushing to the serving window to tell him about what had happened. I opened the window, all while frantically relaying the story. Dave just laughed and muttered something about the guy dreaming. He told me that I was being a bit paranoid and that the guy probably just had no filter. For some reason, this put me at ease. Dave reached his hand out the window to place a $5 bill in my tip jar. He usually tipped this amount each morning. "Wow," he exclaimed. "You just opened and your tip jar is already full. I know you make good coffee, but it's not that great." "Huh?" I said, slamming the register shut. The tip jar rested on the outside window ledge, so customers could reach it. I made it a habit of just leaving it outside in between customers, as it could get very busy. I leaned over and looked into the metal canister. Inside the tip jar was a long white envelope that appeared to be stuffed to its capacity. My stomach turned, as I knew it had to be from the guy in the black Honda. "Dave," I said cautiously, It's from that guy I just told you about. I'm not opening that." Dave sipped his cappuccino, and suddenly his goofy demeanor turned serious. "You're right. Let me open it. I have some gloves here." It was late fall and rather cold out. Dave put his gloves on in a dramatic manner, laughing about my paranoia, and proceeded to step outside his car. He took the envelope out of my tip jar and opened it. "Holy shit," he said, his eyes widening. He held up a stack of $20 bills held together by a rubber band. On the back of the stack was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the paper and began to read it, and his eyes grew even wider. His hands started to shake slightly. What does it say?" He simply said, "Get dressed and call the police now." I snatched the note from him, his jaw slightly agape. The note was laden with spelling errors, and looked as if it was written in a child's hand. Oddly, there were rather long words that were attempted but spelled incorrectly. It said some very deranged things. There are some things too sick to even mention here, but I will relay the basic message as best as I can recall. Some things you just never forget, even if you want to. "You will come to my house. When you arrive, I will examine you thoroughly. I will then tie you to the post, and you will be punished for what you do. Every inch of your body will be bruised and sore. Afterward, I will untie you and use you in every way possible." He used a different term, but it was extremely graphic and includes the words hog-tied. "You can scream, but no one will hear you. This is your first payment. Upon reading this note and taking this money, you have agreed to follow through. If you do not follow through, you are a stealing, lying whore, and you will be punished more severely than if you cooperated to this initial agreement. You will clean every inch of my house. There will be no mistakes, or there will be much more severe punishment to follow." I got dressed and called the police, and my boss, who finally answered. The police arrived, and I went to the station to explain in detail what had happened. I handed them the note along with the money for evidence. The female police officer, who appeared to be in charge, nonchalantly told me that I should probably quit my job, that this behavior was to be expected from customers. I told her that I had never experienced anything like this before. My boss reviewed the outside videotape footage. The footage showed a man standing outside of the coffee stand window just staring inside. Occasionally it showed him leaning his head into the glass and cupping his hands around his eyes for a better view. It also showed him rubbing his crotch. Apparently he had been standing outside the window since 3:40 a.m., 10 minutes after my initial arrival. At one point, it showed him going back into his car only to re-emerge several minutes later and finally tap on the window. I was shocked to realize that the man had watched me for almost a full hour without my knowledge. I felt stupid, but most of all scared. The footage also revealed that the man had his license plates covered with what appeared to be white paper. After reviewing the footage and the note, the police decided that the man posed a serious threat and that this behavior was not normal. They sent an undercover cop back to the stand with me. I was shocked that they wanted me to go right back to work not even 2 hours after the incident. The cop sat outside in an SUV while I worked. The plan was this. If the man drove through again, I was to flick the open sign on and off to alert him to the man's presence. I worked serving all of my regular customers, trying my best to pretend that nothing happened. I was told not to recall the incident to any of my coworkers or customers that morning, in case they knew the man and warned him of police involvement. The man didn't return that day, but he did return. Little did I know that was only the beginning of a year-long nightmare. The stalking continued for a while, about a year. The stalker left endless creepy gifts for me both at work and at my place of residence, all of which he signed off on as Turner. It got to a point where I couldn't prove it was him, because it would often be sent by a courier or a third party. He continued to come by the stand, and at one point even promised to leave me alone. My coworker was there, and we actually managed to have a brief discussion in which he apologized and agreed that his behavior was inappropriate. However, he resumed his creepy behavior just days later. The police were of no help, and kept insisting to me that it would all magically go away if I just quit my job. I had his license plate, which was from out of state, and a vehicle description, but apparently the car wasn't even registered. I didn't know this was a possibility. Despite taking a leave of absence, the stalking continued. I didn't want to quit my job, as this was shortly after the recession. My mom, the sole provider for a family of 5, had lost her job, so I wanted to chip in and help her so they wouldn't lose the house. Other bikini stands in the area were not hiring, due to being embroiled in prostitution scandals, all of which were heavily covered by the national media. You have no idea how hard it was, and maybe still is, to get a normal job after having worked as a bikini barista. And the few of the scariest incidences were being assaulted in an ice freezer outside of the coffee stand, Turner coming through the drive-thru completely naked and jacking off into a pair of women's underwear. Another incident occurred where my friend gave me a joint a customer had left for me on her shift. Crazy as it may sound, customers fairly often would leave joints in my tip jar instead of money. I liked to smoke a lot at the time. I asked my coworker for the customer's name, but she never got a chance to ask for it. I was told by my friend coworker that he had long hair and looked like a hippie. I smoked the joint before I went to sleep one night, only to have a massive freakout, full of hallucinations and hysteria. I literally thought I saw ghosts, demons, and fire. I ended up in the hospital. I found out in the hospital that in addition to having marijuana in my system, it had also been laced with PCP as well. Later on, Turner would take credit for this by sending a text to my phone, letting me know that if I wanted him to smoke me out that we could get together sometime. Of course, I gave his number to the police. I feel like I gave them enough information to get this guy, but I was just never taken seriously, or they always had bigger fish to fry. They did find out, however, that the phone he used was a burner. In this period of time, it was evident that one of my coworkers was sharing my personal information with Turner in exchange for money. This coworker was later arrested on prostitution charges. I ended up relocating and changing my last name. I did this primarily to get away from Turner, but also so I could get a fresh start with a new employment history and get away from the negative energy that had encircled my life. It may seem strange to you, but after a while, stalking becomes a part of your life. It's kind of like living around a bunch of rattlesnakes. You may feel constantly on guard and on edge, but eventually you work your daily routine around trying your best to avoid the snakes so you won't get bitten. When it happens, you do your best to move on. I've recently found out that a man fitting my stalker's description was incarcerated some time ago for doing something even more frightening to another barista in the PNW. There were also similar incidences and reports of a man driving through bikini stands naked or with women's underwear. I suspect that this man was most likely Turner. I can't be sure if it's the same person, as I was never able to find out this person's true first and last name, but I'm hopeful that it is him, and he'll be locked away for a very long time. Since I'm at home now because of my fibro disability, I've got a lot of time to read these chilling tales. It also gives me time to look back on my own past, remember some of my scarier moments, and I have several more stories to tell and share. And this was one of those memories that I remembered and wanted to share right now. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP/phone long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon or Quest would call and say DT1 lines were down or there were outages. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I could do anything my male counterparts could. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday, from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., with an hour lunch, and after 6 p.m. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night, I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, schoolwork, or writing done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a while. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone, so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda or go get food and so on. One time while I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door. Nothing else really to make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much, because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't really help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times I felt like somebody was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or a snack, but sometimes it just didn't feel fast enough. So, one night I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow dragging night, and I needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feelings off, and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up, and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around, and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place. Then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise after all. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head that it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around the office. Nothing seemed to be out of place, until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflecting of the lights outside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I've ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason why he would be there checking it out. As I sit in my chair, I hear the doors begin to shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors. They didn't budge to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't quite tell which. Once his eyes locked on mine, he started to bang harder and smacked at the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass doors to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. Yes, I need someone to come out. There's this guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I couldn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of the darkness and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what had just happened, and I explained that a rock had smashed against the glass. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over my wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I've read many of these stories on this sub, and when people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough, they aren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. Another smash against the door, but along with that, glass breaking sounds. Sirens could be heard rushing towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of the entryway. One officer came to the front door, and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come into the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me, and let me explain what I had saw happen. Soon my boss arrived and checked on me and then the damage. At some point my husband was called and told I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off, and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with the next coworker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of the provisioner. From smartphones to Blackberries when they were still worth buying, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later, and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security cameras all over the building. This happened a couple of days ago. For reference, I'm a 17-year-old female in Australia, and I live a half-hour drive out of town. It was about 10:30 p.m., and I had just finished work. I was on the close shift, and it was a Tuesday night, so naturally it was pretty dead and nobody was around. I was driving home alone, and I was stuck behind this 4WD Ute thing, not good with cars, sorry, and needed to get into the next lane. He was indicating, but wasn't actually going anywhere, so I indicated and overtook him into the next lane over. As I was level with him, he began veering towards me, and all I could think was how much it was going to cost to fix that, so I slammed my hand on the horn and made a "what the fuck, bro" gesture as I passed him. In an awkward coincidence, the lights turned red and we stopped side by side. He motioned for me to wind the window down, and I obliged. I was about to apologize, but I didn't even get a word out before he started screaming at me. He called me a cunt, a fucking bitch, and a fucking pea-plater mongrel, and then he threatened to ram my ass on the motorway. I was tired, it was late, and I couldn't be bothered with him, so I just rolled my eyes at him and wound the window back up while he was talking. That royally pissed him off. He turned bright red, and I saw him reach down, and the ute door opened. I panicked and floored it through the red light onto the motorway. I thought I was alright for a second, but I saw him in my mirror speeding up behind me. He was clearly speeding to catch up to me, since I was going about 10 kilometers over the speed limit. He had his high beams on and kept flashing them. He was right up behind me, and I could only think about what he'd said about crashing into me, so I tried to go a little bit faster. I was looking for his number plates in the mirror so I could report him, but either the lights were too bright for me to see, or there was nothing there at all. There was no way in hell I was going to stop after that performance before. I finally got off the motorway. He was still behind me, and I was a little paranoid that he was following me, even though the motorway only really led to one area. It could have still been a coincidence. I pulled into the nearest street, but he was still behind me. I promptly did a U-turn, and when the guy did as well, I realized he was absolutely chasing me. I was about 20 minutes away from home at this point, and I didn't want to lead him anywhere near my house, so I decided on a split-second decision to go to the nearest police station to hopefully get him off my ass. Unfortunately, the nearest police station closed at 9:30, and I only ended up pulling into a dark, empty car park. I pulled over facing the entrance, so I could see if he had followed me. I didn't see him coming in, thankfully, and I figured he'd chickened out once he saw the police station. I debated calling the cops since I didn't think I was in any danger anymore. That was until I noticed out of the corner of my eye a certain white ute slowly creeping up on my left with its lights off. Once again, I panicked and floored it out of the car park and back towards the main road. I had no idea where I was going, no intention to pull over, and no clue who I should call. I was going in the complete opposite direction of my house. I eventually spotted a nice, brightly lit petrol station and pulled in there, parking as close to the doors as I possibly could. I jumped out, frantically waved my arms around at the doors. They lock them at night and have to be manually opened. When I was let in, I started screaming at the poor lady at the register to lock the doors and that someone was following me. I was absolutely terrified, but thankfully she was quick on the uptake and locked the doors. I realized I'd left my phone in the car, but she offered to call the police for me. I was keeping an eye on the road outside while the clerk called the cops. I absolutely saw that car drive past, but he didn't come in. And the clerk waited with me for the cops to show up, and eventually they did. It was almost 11 by the time they got there. I had literally never been happier to see a cop car in my life. They asked me to describe the guy and the ute, and asked for the registration. I gave them what I could, and one of them drove me home. I haven't heard any follow-ups from anyone, but it was absolutely terrifying. Enough so that I asked to be taken off night shifts for a long time. I've only been driving for a little under a year, but honestly, I don't think anything is going to top that experience.